So this is a war on Iran, a Zoom session, and we'll just get right to it. I'm going to introduce Khury Petersen-Smith, is the Michael Ratner Middle East Fellow and the co-director of the New Internationalism Project at IPS. He researches U.S. empire, borders, and migration, and strategizes with activists to work against the violence that the U.S. carries out and supports around the world. Khury focuses especially on U.S. militarism in the Middle East and in the Pacific, and movements that resist it. He graduated from the Clark University Graduate School of Geography in Massachusetts after completing a dissertation on U.S. military bases in the Pacific. He is one of the co-authors and organizers of the 2023 Black Voices for Ceasefire statement, which was signed by over 6,000 Black activists, artists, and scholars. So, you ready to get started there, Khury?
I am. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Really grateful and just have tremendous respect and gratitude for Vets for Peace and owe so much of my entry into anti-war and peace work to the presence and the work of VFP members and supporters. So big gratitude to all of you. And we have our work cut out for us, friends. There's a lot to do. And, I have some analytical thoughts about this horrific war. But I have to start, it just has to be said. There's an unreal a level of suffering happening at the moment in Iran, in the region. You know, this is not only a new offensive on Iran by the US and Israel, but it is also a continuation of an open-ended Israeli offensive that has lasted for, 3 years now, including an ongoing genocide in Gaza, an ongoing, just horrific level of forced displacement and removal of Palestinians from their land in the West Bank as well as an invasion, essentially, of Lebanon, and a kind of ongoing war on Lebanon, including the seizure of land there as well. So, and there's just suffering throughout the region and spilling beyond the region, frankly. And we can talk about the level of environmental catastrophe that this war has already produced just in a couple of weeks, primarily from the US and Israel bombing Iranian oil infrastructure, but of course, Iran also hitting oil infrastructure in the Gulf. In a world economy that is based on petroleum, there is suffering as well, secondarily. So it's horrific, and we have to start there and just start with the fact that we have to end this. So that's the first thing that has to be said. The second thing is just the question that folks keep on asking me, which is the right question, is or a right question is, how long do we anticipate this thing lasting? And it has been challenging to figure out how to organize against what's been a Pentagon rampage over the past year, talking about the bombing of Somalia, the bombing of Yemen, the bombing of Iran during a 12-day war last year, another U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, the bombing of Nigeria, and of course the airstrikes in the Caribbean, as well as the attack on Venezuela and the abduction of their head of state, Nicolas Maduro. And so with all of these different episodes, it's been quite challenging, I think, to figure out how to even counter, this wave of violence. And part of the problem is, or one of the things that has made it so challenging, is that all of the examples that I just named were devastating for the people in all the places that I named. But on the U.S. end, they were quite bounded, these operations, if you want to call them that. When the U.S. bombed Somalia last year, around this time last year, Trump said, this is the largest airstrike in world history. This was really about a kind of narrative point, actually. It was not so much about a geopolitical strategy as much as telling a story about American power and kind of unrivaled American military power. And they were able to do that in a way that was, again, on the US end of things, quite limited. It was not open-ended. It was, we know exactly what we want to do, and they did it, and then they told the story that they wanted to tell. This is quite different. This is a lot more open-ended. As we know, they have been vague and contradictory with their goals when they have even named goals, which they have largely avoided. They have not communicated. They've not felt compelled to communicate in the way that past presidents have when the U.S. declares a war. There's usually a presidential address to the nation or something like that. They haven't even bothered to do that. They haven't bothered to address Congress about it, really. Trump addressed a joint session of Congress days before this war started at the State of the Union address, and he mentioned Iran, but he didn't even bother to make the case for this, right? So the point being here, they have not communicated a clear set of goals, and it's not evident to me that actually in the White House and Pentagon that they are united on a clear set of goals. I think that the closest thing that we have to kind of getting a sense of what they want is looking at the past year of the Pentagon rampage. And in particular, I think the last Operation Venezuela was really instructive, actually. And Trump and Hegseth and Rubio were riding high on that. But this notion that the U.S. can go ahead and do what it wants to do in Venezuela, abduct a head of state, kill dozens of people, et cetera, and then get what it wants from a government that was considered an adversary. That, I think, is what is in Trump's mind. And that is what he has said, that he either wants to make a deal with the Iranian government or that the regime should end. And he has encouraged Iranians to overthrow the regime and so on. The problem from his perspective is both of those things seem unlikely. It seems extremely unlikely that Iran is going to make a deal with Trump. And in fact, by selecting a new supreme leader after the US and Israel assassinated the old one, and then who they selected, just to say the son of the old one, signaled a defiance. This is not a government that's looking to make a deal with Trump. Also, the notion that there's going to be so-called regime change through some uprising across the country also at the moment seems quite unlikely. And I put these things on the table to say, I don't think that this is going to be resolved from the White House perspective in a way that is satisfying anytime soon. We don't know. It is not outside the realm of possibility that this president could just decide to call it off tomorrow, given how chaotic and kind of volatile his whole approach is. But as anti-war activists, I think that we should prepare ourselves to dig in for something that might last. So I really wanted to get that point across. And with I don't want to speak for too much longer, but I want to say a word about if we are going to do that digging in and prepare for a war that might last, what kind of anti-war movement do we need? And just want to offer a few thoughts on that. I will say it's painfully evident that war and militarism are and will be central features of this presidency. I know there was that landed as a bit confusing, I think, for many people, because when Trump was a candidate, he kind of postured against the forever wars. I hope that confusion is, among people in this country is cleared up now. He came to wage all kinds of wars, both abroad and also militarism here domestically. Those are going to be features of what they want to do. And if war and militarism are features of this time, that means that anti-war organizing and anti-militarism also have to be features of this time. And I think that's really our job, is to make sure that those are factors in determining how this all plays out. I do think that there is some obvious continuity between this horrific, U.S.-Israeli war and the wars that came before it. In particular, I'll point to just the incredible lack of accountability. And I'm thinking in particular of the past 2+ decades of the post 9/11 wars, right? These were years and years of the US committing all kinds of horrific crimes all over the world and paying virtually no price for it. I mean, there were no real consequences for Washington over successive administrations for 2+ decades. Similarly, over the past year, all the things that I named that they've done, they basically paid no price for it. And that level of impunity informs what they are doing now. So that is the continuity, some of the continuity. But there are some things that are quite different, I would argue, about this war. And it has been useful, kind of painful, but clarifying and useful to contrast this current war on Iran with the 2003 US invasion of Iraq. During that invasion, or rather prior to that invasion, the US felt compelled to go to the United Nations and make the case. At the moment, the UN is essentially a non-factor. That may change, but at the moment, they're not a factor at all. The US wasn't compelled at all to make that case. As I pointed out, the president didn't even feel compelled to make the case to the US public or the US Congress. And it is a Congress, I understand why he didn't feel compelled, because it is a Congress that's essentially handed him the keys to do whatever he wants. That's quite different. Another thing that is different is not only did they not make the case, but what they have said is quite different than what they said previously. In the post 9/11 wars and the wars that came before it, I mean, the wars that kind of shaped my childhood, in the course of my lifetime, the kind of heading or the watchword or the pretext was of humanitarian intervention. This notion that the United States is a force for good in the world. It carries out these wars for democracy. The U.S. invasion of Afghanistan was sold with the notion that it was liberating Afghan women and so on. That stuff is all absent now. There is no pretext. They don't even feel compelled to make one. They're pretty straightforward about this being about conquest, especially if you listen to Hegseth. So I just put that on the table to say they are adjusting their ways of making war in the 21st century. And I think that we need to adjust an anti-war movement in the 21st century. What I will end on is I think there has to be a number of elements in the anti-war movement that we are building and need to build. I really think that there's a number of very important initiatives in Congress that I'm sure others will speak to that are urgent, very important. We should plug into those and support those. Beyond Congress, there's a lot of work to be done, and one key area is in the realm of narrative. That is, how are we helping people to understand this war and mobilize against it? The irony or the paradox is that the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq actually had the support of the overwhelming majority of the U.S. population. Ironically, today, clear and growing majorities oppose this war in Iran, and yet that opposition is not visible because we don't have a visible anti-war movement. Our challenge is making that visible. And the fact that Trump has not felt compelled to make the case to the U.S. public says a number of things, but one of those things is I think it opens the space or seeds the ground for us to make a case, for us to offer an explanation as to why they are doing this. And I think that there are particular groups of people in our society who are positioned well and have a certain responsibility to do that kind of narrating. And crucial among those are anti-war veterans. I think that narrating the experience of what has led you all to anti-war politics and opposing this war on a basis that centers humanity and centers the humanity of Iranians, which is really, it must be said, quite absent actually. It's insufficient, even if there's majority opposition to this war. The way that we are talking about Iranians in this country or not talking about Iranians it's a problem. And I think that it's actually our role to highlight their humanity. So I will stop there and I look forward to others' comments. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Matthew Ho. Matthew Ho is a disabled Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War and former Afghan War State Department officer. In 2009, after being appointed to the Foreign Service, Ho resigned his post in Afghanistan over the Obama administration's escalation of the Afghan War. He is now an analyst and commentator on foreign and military policy issues as a senior fellow with the Eisenhower Media Network. He serves on the advisory boards of many peace organizations, including Veterans for Peace and World Beyond War, and is an associate member of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Matt Ho.
Thanks, Patrick, and thanks, Khury. That was really terrific. That was really great. And two things before I begin. One, both Ray and I, and I'm sure of a lot of you as well, because this storm is huge, are under a severe thunderstorm warning right now. So if we cut out, it's probably because our power went out, not because we were, any other reason. And then the other aspect is I learned today that Packy Wheeland passed away. And many of you in the anti-war community will know Packy through her work with Code Pink, and just an incredible, delightful, wonderful person. And I just want to say I'm really disappointed I'll never get to see her again. And I feel like many of you feel that way as well. And I think, Ray said this to me years ago. Yeah, he probably doesn't remember it, but years ago, he said, Matt, in the anti-war community, we may not accomplish what we want to accomplish, but we're going to be around a whole lot of good people while we try. And Packy Wheeland certainly exemplified that. So, just going to miss her. But two things I want to touch on in my comments. One is the difference between this war in Iran in 2026 and the war in Iraq in 2003. Just go through some bullet points there and then get into some thoughts I have on Iran and how they're fighting this war and why this is such a dangerous thing for the United States. I would say the first difference between, let me just also set the stage that this is the largest war, the largest military operation by far of the United States since the Obama administration's escalation of the Afghan war in 2009 and 2010. And I'll get into this at the end of my comments, but this really shows a disconnect between the United States policies as they've carried out their wars throughout the last generation, essentially, and this war, and just the fundamental dissonance between the way Americans conduct their warfare and the principles, the principles, the doctrine, the views that supposedly inhibit the foreign policy establishment. But the first key difference between this war and the 2003 war is simply that in 2003, competent liars were in charge, and now you have incompetent liars. I think the danger in all of that is probably doesn't need more explanation. The 2003 war, like this war, had many reasons. It had many parents, right? Many different industries, institutions, individuals had their own reasons or benefited from the 2003 war on Iraq, just as this 2026 war on Iran has many different individuals, institutions, interests, etc., who are benefiting from it or who want it. But one of the things you see, though, is a difference in the makeup of the people that are surrounding the American presidents. And certainly, if you looked at who surrounded George W. Bush, you would see it's a cast of characters that are dominated by ideology, that have loyalty to institutions, that have an allegiance to a worldview that defined and then was expressed through the global war of terror, of course, but was something that was identifiable, something that you could view, you could analyze, you could then expect what's going to come next. They were predictable in a way. This cast of characters, this cabal, this outfit or gang or however you want to call them, that's in power now, They are not ideologues. They have no loyalty to the institutions or the infrastructures upon which they sit. They are con men and women. They are grifters. They are opportunists. They are people who, like their boss, have succeeded by understanding the corrupt political and media environment in the United States. And so they're not predictable. Their understanding of the world is incredibly limited, and it is all through a very ego-driven self-view of the world or self-interest with the world. And so that, again, it makes a difference here between, do you want a war led by those who have at least some type of structure to their thinking, or do you want a war led by those who can be defined as being nihilists, sadists, opportunists? So it's a question, I guess, of imperial order versus imperial barbarity. There's no right answer to that question, of course. Both are wrong and both are ruinous and disastrous. And the only reason that you could say the Bush administration or Obama administration is worse than the Trump administration is just simply by the body counts that they racked up, which the Trump administration hasn't had a chance yet to do. But the one thing, too, that makes a difference here between 03 and 26 is the president himself. And we saw that George Bush was not going to change his mind. Even in 06, when the U.S. Congress is handed over to the Democrats through the midterm elections, Bush fires Rumsfeld as an offering, but he doesn't. He replaces him with Bob Gates, and then he sends tens of thousands of more troops to Iraq. Right, that was the consequences of the political victory against the war in 2006. Right. So you saw George Bush was a president who was not going to change his mind. Donald Trump, as Khury mentioned, as we all know, right, is famously fickle. He's famously temperamental. As we're doing this, he could be banging out on his phone a truth, social truth, whatever message, saying the war's over, we won. So there is that difference between 03 and 26 that I think we do have to understand, is that we have a president, and there's a genius in that, if you will, and put genius in quotes. If you don't have any objectives, you don't have any stated goals, then nobody could hold you to that. Right? So essentially the timeline for this, the president feels, is open-ended and up to him. And I'll get into my remarks on the Iranians about how that's simply not the case, though. That's a very grave and disastrous mistake the Americans are making, thinking that they have control here. They do not. And then finally, I would say the fourth large main difference for me is the difference between Iraq and Iran. And now I'll get into my comments about Iran. But certainly Iraq did not prepare for the war in the way that Iran has. Even the insurgency or the resistance that fought the Americans and the other foreign occupiers, that wasn't, there are allegations that was planned by the Ba'athist government, and there is some degree to that. But for the most part, that resistance came from Iraqis many months after the occupation had began, and almost none of the resistance groups were saying our goal is to put Saddam Hussein or his successor back into power. While in 26 here with Iran, we see clearly aspects of the Iranians that they have prepared for this war and a degree of competency at their strategic and political leadership that just absolutely outmatches the Americans. The first thing you see is the planning and the preparation. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all this. We can go into this more in the comments, but the planning and the preparation. This is a war that Iran knew was coming. It's a war it tried to avoid either through brief conflicts with the Americans and the Israelis, or through negotiations. It built up a network of allies throughout the region, which we now see being put into place here with both the Iraqi resistance, Hezbollah being involved in this war, and everyone is waiting for Yemen to enter the war as well. And then and we can get into what that would mean. So there was a planning and preparation here by the Iranians that was simply well done, if you will. The strategic patience of Iran is absolutely remarkable. And this might be the most dangerous thing about the Iranians in terms of fighting them in a war. This is a country that endured these attacks for years, whether they be cyber attacks, sabotage, whether it be assassinations of their political figures and leaders. I mean, as well, then, too, of course, then the two conflicts in 2024 with the Americans and the Israelis, and then 12-day war last year, and the Iranians held back. They had a view, they had a plan, they had an idea of where they wanted to go with this, and they kept to it. I mean, some of the more easily identifiable things you can say that they were patient about was they simply didn't utilize their best missiles. What nation in war is able to do that? What nation is able to go through war is able to go to 3 iterations of conflict, absorbing the losses that the Iranians did in 2024 and 2025, and hold back with their best missiles. The same with their drones. They underplayed their drones massively in those iterations of war. I mean, so if you have an opponent who is willing to fight you with one hand tied behind his back, well, that's someone you have to really be careful of, because they have a confidence as well as a plan that you simply don't seem to have any conception of. And then, of course, I think the biggest thing was that the Iranians, as we can tell, and now we're going to have a harder time with this because the commercial satellites are being blocked or shut down. We won't have the images coming out of burning American bases throughout the region as we've had the last couple of weeks, because the satellites are not going to be allowed to show that. But this idea that the Iranians had a very good understanding of the American layout throughout the region. Their intelligence, whether that was their own satellite intelligence, signal intelligence, human intelligence, seems to have been tremendously spot on. And they never gave that away. The fact that the Iranians caused such damage to American command and control systems and radar systems in the first few days of this war then shows that integration of their intelligence with their planning and preparation that, again, outshines really anything you've seen the Americans or Israelis do so far in this war. The initiative. The Iranians have the initiative here. It's very clear. You see the Americans reacting to what the Iranians are doing. I mean, this idea that the Iranians are setting the tempo, they're setting the boundaries of this war, that they are setting as well, too, the conditions for what the war is understood as, not just by the participants, not just by the region, but by the entire world. And again, forcing the Americans to react to that, right? Forcing the president of the United States to constantly, every day, have to explain what are we doing in response to the Iranians' actions. Nobody wants to hear about the American bombs being dropped all throughout Iran, the thousands and thousands of missile and bomb strikes. What people want to know is, what are the Americans going to do about the Strait of Hormuz? What are you going to do about our allies being upset with us because their countries are being bombed? What are you going to do about the fact that oil is now over $100 a barrel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So the Iranian control of the initiative here is really something that, again, is quite masterful. And then, that leads into the Iranian understanding of warfare. The principles of war, but more particularly the levels of warfare. And, you have tactical, operational, strategic, and political levels of warfare. The Americans seem to always be stuck in the tactical and the operational levels of warfare. They do it quite well. They're able to drop bombs on things. They're able to get the fuel to the planes halfway around the world to get them to drop the bombs. They're able to coordinate mass movements of troops and forces and planes and ships throughout the world and communicate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But those are the tactical and operations level warfare. And you learn in the first couple weeks of being an officer in the U.S. military that those are the levels that do not win war. War is won at the strategic and political levels. And you see that with the Iranians, with what their goals are, their objectives. They have clear political objectives and goals. I mean, essentially establish deterrence in the Middle East so that this will never, ever happen again. And they have a strategy to achieve it. And they carried out that strategy right away. The strategy was to expand the war horizontally, to bring in countries throughout the region. I think 13 different countries have been involved in this war so far. That puts pressure on the Americans, as well then, too, to utilize their greatest weapon, or the greatest weapon they could, economic warfare, and bring the whole world into the war this way. They understand that this is eventually how the Americans may be forced to withdraw. is the pressure that they are receiving because of their allies are going to abandon them and because of the economic consequences of this war. So the Iranians' ability to understand the levels of warfare, to carry that out, to understand these are our political objectives, and this is a strategy through which we're going to achieve them. It doesn't matter how many boats of ours the Americans blow up, because what matters are the political objectives of this war. And then, of course, just, rhetorical question, does anyone think the Americans have anything like that at all, right? And, even in all this too, it's just quite remarkable looking at this. Because you see, what's the cost now? The Iranians have said ships can go through the Straits of Hormuz as long as they are not American, Israeli, or allied with the American Israelis. And what's the other thing they said about that? They have to pay in yuan, right? So you see here not just an Iranian political objective to remake the Middle East, to establish deterrence for themselves, to protect their sovereignty, right? But also to a desire to remake the world that is not any type of selfish desire, but it's a desire that we are in a multipolar world, and the rules of the world order that were established by the United States following the Second World War, whether those be political, military, or economic rules, have to go. And so you see through this aspect of trying to degrade the petrodollar and to carry forward this process of de-dollarization, an aspect to the Iranian strategy here to achieve political objectives that aren't just immediate, but also long term. So, again, and you compare that to how the Americans have conducted this, and, certainly for a host of reasons, you could say why the United States launched this war. It's illegal, it's immoral, but also, too, you can say, why did they choose this enemy? And, so I appreciate you all having me here. And, I look forward to seeing what Ray has to say. And then, of course, any questions or comments.
Thank you, Matt. Okay. Ray McGovern's long-term focus has been on Russian foreign policy. He joined the analysis side of the CIA in early 1963 after serving 2 years as an Army infantry intelligence officer. He speaks Russian, German, and Spanish. From 1981 to 1985, Ray conducted early morning one-on-one briefings of the president's daily brief. At retirement, he was awarded the Intelligence Commendation Medal on medallion, but later returned it, saying he did not want to be associated, however remotely, with an agency involved in torture. In January 2003, he co-created Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, VIPS, to expose the fraudulent intelligence concocted to justify war on Iraq. By May 4th, 2006, on May 4th, 2006, in Atlanta, Ray confronted Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld on the TV with pointed questions like, why did you lie to get us into a war that was not necessary and that has caused these kinds of casualties? Ray McGovern, you're on.
I just wanted to thank Matt and Khury and Patrick for convening this group.
And Jim.
And Jim, yeah. Well, now let me just say a few things. I go back a while to well before Iraq. What I hear now from younger people, including some of my own grandchildren as well as children, is what kind of thing is this? There's no plan. There's no, they're going to have ground troops on the ground and gas has gone up. Or what? I don't know this. Nobody asks why. There was a title of an article 3 days ago. It said, "It's Israel, stupid." And it's very clear, if you pay attention to more than the mainstream media, that this is indeed the case. Now, what do I mean? Well, on the 26th of February, there was a meeting in Geneva between the Iranian foreign minister and two emissaries from Trump, Witkoff and Kushner. The intermediary, the Omani foreign minister was so enthused with the results of this meeting, which she mediated, that he flew on the next plane to Washington. And on the 27th, he briefed the vice president. And then, perhaps because he wasn't quite sure he had convinced the vice president, he insisted on going on Margaret Brennan, right? CBS. And he said, we're this close to an agreement. I'm so enthused. He says, and he spelled out exactly why. The Iranians had made specific concessions on enrichment to the extent of IAEA inspect, even letting U.S. inspectors in maybe later on. It looked so close, okay? And what happened? Within 24 hours, Trump followed Israel in attacking Iran. And when I say follow Israel, what do you mean? Well, Rubio, who is the Secretary of State and also the National Security Advisor, admitted. He said, well, we didn't have much choice. The Israelis said they were going to attack Iran, and so, well, we were afraid that the Iranians would retaliate against us, and so went ahead. My God, how crazy is that? How crazy is that? Well, if you get my drift here, Israel is the major factor behind this. If you have any doubts as to what tail is wagging the dog, look at Max Blumenthal's interview with John Mearsheimer just yesterday. It's a short 3-minute sort of thing. Don't miss it. He's got it right. So, what else to be said here? So the question is why. My answer is Israel, and it was the same for Iraq. Now, I was really very much involved. That's when we set up our Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity 3 months before the attack on Iraq. We saw through what Colin Powell was saying at the UN. It was really pretty disastrous performance by him. And we could see that this knee-jerk identification with Iraq, with Israel was getting us into trouble deep, as we used to say in the comic books. So, what are the proof? Well, need I add that General Scowcroft, National Security Advisor to George H.W. Bush, and just a paragon of the establishment, went to the Financial Times in London and said, look, the problem is Ariel Sharon, Netanyahu's predecessor, has George W. Bush wrapped around his little finger. He has him mesmerized. Whoa! Now, Scowcroft never said anything like that out of school. He was chairman of the president's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board at that time, so he knew chapter and verse, had all the material necessary to form that judgment. He lost his job, of course, and he was banished from Washington, but at least he told the truth these 2 times, okay? We give him credit for that. Now, I just want to get a little human here and point out that today is the anniversary of the cold murder of Rachel Khury, 23-year-old student who had signed up to find out what was going on there, and was standing in front of an Israeli bulldozer trying to prevent it from knocking down the house of the Palestinian doctors that she had been living in. Now, this was which was March 16th, right? That's what it is today, March 16th, 2003. The bulldozer was given orders to run her over and then back over her to make sure her back was broken, which it was, in the full sight of these other international volunteers. The message being, international volunteers are no longer immune to this kind of treatment. You better knock it off, okay? Now, did anybody see anything real cynical about March 16th? What happened 3 days later? The invasion of Iraq. So the Israelis knew damn well that Rachel Khury's murder would not appear in any U.S. newspapers. And long story short, the government covered it up. They made no attempt to help find justice for the bulldozer Caterpillar bulldozers made in Peoria uh, to make good on that. So the Khury family, actually, I met them in 2004 in Olympia. We had a 2 hour plus brunch, and I was wearing a orange bracelet, and Craig Khury, Rachel's father, Cindy is her mother. He said, "Ray, what's that?" And I took it off. I said, "Well, it's against torture, those orange." And then I said, "What's that on your hand?" And he said, "Oh, well, that's." He took it off and he gave it to me. I've been wearing it ever since. So we've gone through about six of them, and they're only made out of plastic. But all it says is Rachel Khury, April 10th, 1979, March 16, 2003. Wow. Well, why do I wear this all the time? Well, it gives me courage, okay? I think maybe it could give all of us courage. In our Catholic tradition, we call it a sacramental, some object, picture, or something that gives grace, gives us the courage to carry on and do the kinds of things that this item reminds us of. So, what's my next thing? Here I am. It was mentioned that I challenged Rumsfeld on the 4th of May 20 years ago. Here I am sitting at a high heel, well-heeled lecture there that they didn't think they could get me in, but the women of the world can't wait got me in, or got me a ticket. And I'm sitting there listening to all this claptrap. And then there was a Q&A. And so I tried to get up there with the first question, but of course the first question was, was right there, all prepared. And I got up and I challenged him, okay? Now, what I want to drive home here is that as I sat there and I looked at this very, for me, hostile audience, applauding Rumsfeld up and down, I said to myself, oh my God, McGovern, this is, you're really going to do this? I had chapter and verse, of course, because he had lied and I could prove it. Then I thought, well, now the women from the world can't wait who paid $60 to get me in here. Uh, Medea Benjamin or Anne Wright or Paki Nolan wouldn't be asking themselves, get up there, get your rear end up there, McGovern, and ask the questions. What I'm saying here is that we could take a lot of encouragement from the women in our movement that often show more guts than some of our men, which leads me to the misogyny, the savagery, especially against women, exhibited by our leaders now. I'm thinking especially of Pete Hegseth. This is what his mother wrote when she heard that he was nominated to be Secretary of Defense and now Secretary of War. Quote, "You are an abuser of women. That is the ugly truth, and I have no respect for any man that belittles, lies, cheats, sleeps around, and uses women for his own power and ego. You are that man and have been for years. And as your mother, it pains me it embarrasses me to say that, but it is a sad, sad truth." Signed, Penelope Hegseth. Why do I make a point out of this? Well, it is demonstrably true that Hegseth was responsible for those 170 young schoolgirls between the ages of 6 and 12 who were massacred by Tomahawk missiles. Scott Ritter has chapter and verse on that. Suffices to say that there were 4 missiles, and then the last one saw a lot of people couldn't distinguish were they little people or big people, and then big people coming in cars, and so they thermobaric them, or whatever you call it. There were only little splinters or ashes left. Does it have something to do with the dishonor or the what's the word? Misogyny, the degradation of women? Well, I mean, look at Epstein, you know. Uh, Look at underage women trafficked. Look at the small little girls of Minap. I think it's our duty to spread the word to the best we can as to who is responsible for all this. And in the first instance, it's Hegseth. I did mention, but it's demonstrable that he obliterated. He did away with the people who were supposed to have a final look at those target lists. Okay, that school was known to be a school since 2016. Okay, so yeah, we give no quarter, right? We have no mercy. My God, is that our America? So I think, um, well, I would like to close with quotes from two of my favorite people. One is Martin Luther King Jr. Um, it means a lot to me. Every course I taught, whatever the subject, I used the letter from the Birmingham City Jail. No one adverts much to this particular paragraph, but it seems to me that this personifies or puts in bas relief what we're all about. What he says is this, and I quote, like a boil that can never be cured unless it is opened up with all its pus-flowing ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light, so too injustice must be exposed with all the friction its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. That's Dr. King, Brother Martin. Last but not least, I have a very close friend. She's Iranian. She is also a poet. And she wrote this poet, In Memoriam, the dear little girls of Minap. It'll take a minute. I would like to close with this. In Memoriam, where were your dreams? What were your hopes, sweet little girls of Minap? Were you to be the new blooms of the tulips and daffodils, sweet little girls of Minap? Or you're fasting, hungry and thirsty, sweet little girls of Minap? When the tomahawk blew you to smithereens, then burnt you to ashes without leaving a trace of you, my angels, my beautiful, sweet little girls of Minap. Tell me, who has the heart? Who has so much hatred in their hearts to burn to ashes, sweet little girls of Minap, with their hopes and dreams as tulips and daffodils swaying under the blue dome of the sky, innocently hoping and waiting for a new spring to arrive? Tell me, who has so much hatred in their hearts? I think the way we conquer hatred is by nonviolent, active love. I think love is a creature of justice, as Martin Luther King pointed out. We need to do justice in love, but we need to do it now. In other words, we need to be winter soldiers. Many of us were soldiers or still are. We need to be winter soldiers of the kind that existed more than 250 years ago and enabled us to have freedoms for the nonce and enabled us and sort of compel us to defend those freedoms and to stop our deleterious activity abroad. We can do that. I think that there's a group here that can, and that's us. Let's go ahead and do it. Thank you very much.
I think, Jim, I think you should take it away from here, take it away at this point, and we'll ask for questions and answer. and in the matter in which they come. Sam Coleman?
Okay.
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
and make sure you put your hand up. You can go do that by going to, reactions down there, and it'll have a thing for raise your hand because I have a question also. So, Sam.
Thanks so much, everybody, for organizing this session. Thinking in terms of the terrain in the United States now, domestically, where anti-war organizing effectively could occur, especially in organizations that still exist. I mean, I think the No Kings marches are wonderful, but they've got no leaders, frankly. I'm sorry. I think about the Vietnam War and the way in which many Protestant churches took the lead. And yet, by the time Andrew Bacevich wrote The New American Militarism, boy, was it depressing to listen to him. He said, there ain't nothing there. Now, maybe internationally, the Gulf states are so pissed off that they're going to withdraw all of their investments in Trump's various projects. But here, as a matter of fact, I'm particularly interested in what Khury Petersen-Smith has to say, but I'll ask this of all three of you. What's out there organizationally? Where are those buds that we can go to? Thank you.
All right, Khury, take it away.
Yeah, I think that there's some really good. I'm involved with a group called Dissenters, which is a youth anti-militarism organization, and I think that the work of youth organizers and students are extremely important. This is the question of war and militarism and authoritarianism are all locked in together. And talking to students who are organizing on campus right now, it is it's such a difficult environment to organize in, which on one hand is terrible, but on the other hand means that there are students, some of whom are anti-war activists, some of whom are other activists, some of whom are just students who want a more open space, who have an interest in pushing back that kind of authoritarianism and therefore maybe potentially being part of the anti-war movement. Do you know what I mean? And frankly, it reminds me of what I've read about the Vietnam anti-war movement, how in so many ways it started out as a free speech movement because things were so stultified, coming out of the McCarthy era. So anyway, I think that that's really important. But the truth is, I think that we have to look in places where maybe there are buds, but maybe there could be buds. I mean, I've been wondering about. Let me put it this way: the majority. This is the point. The majority of people are against the war, and that is maybe some of you have lived in a time when the majority of people agree with you on a kind of anti-war position. I have not experienced that until the Gaza genocide, when the majority of Americans opposed U.S. support for Israel. And that was such a breakthrough, and one that I don't think we fully appreciated actually what all that means, that the majority of Americans are with us. And that's true again now. And I just find myself, in a cafe and thinking, man, if the majority of Americans are against this war, that means the majority of people in this cafe are against the war. I mean, that means the majority of teachers are against the war. It means the majority of nurses are against the war. And what exactly that means, I think we have to think through. But it is a very different orientation than certainly I've ever had. So that's what I'll offer. And if I could say just one other brief thing, and so grateful for Matt and Ray's comments, and the one thing I'll add just to the point that Ray made about the Israeli role in all this. I hear that, and the role that Israel plays looms so large right now, it's unreal. And I just want to make sure that in that conversation we don't let the U.S. off the hook. Because around 2003, there was a popular saying in Washington that was, everybody wants to go to Baghdad, but the real men want to go to Tehran, which is to say, there are people who for decades, Americans, not just Israelis, for decades have wanted this war. So I hear you, and yes, and also we have to own this also. I just want to make sure that that's part of the conversation. So thank you.
Matt?
Oh, God, Khury, you just gave me terrible, terrible memories of Washington, D.C. in 2003. And these people who come back from Baghdad in their suits, wearing their combat boots and saying such things. When I got to Baghdad in 2004, early 2004, and was part of the Coalition Provisional Authority in Baghdad, the line you hear all the time is, well, we just got to figure out whether we're going to go left or right next, meaning going to Syria or to Iran. And I agree with Khury here. Israel certainly is a culprit in this. If you brought all the folks into the room together, who's responsible for this? The Israelis are sitting in the front row. But for me, this is the reality of the American empire. That this is what happens to nations that stand against the hegemon. This was always going to be Iran's fate. And I would say that you look at Israel, you look at the military-industrial complex, whatever you want to point to, those are manifestations of the empire. We were an empire and did these sorts of things long before there was Israel, long before 1961 when Dwight Eisenhower said there's a military-industrial complex. I mean, so for me, this goes back, the roots of this is the American empire. And that's the point I want to get to address Sam's question here, is what we can do in terms of educating. I have no faith in electoralism and all this. I mean, we just watched the Democratic Party willingly lose the presidential election rather than go against AIPAC, right? I mean, go against, and that is, again, specifically, you can talk about Israel here, but that's symptomatic of the larger issue that we have a government that is a form of government that is legalized bribery. Right. So, I mean, again, yes, Israel is a very important issue. It is proximate. It is acute at this moment, but it is not the root cause of this. The root cause of this is our imperialism as an empire, as well as, of course, and I'm sorry, I think my hand movement is causing lots of thumbs up here. So I'll try, but as well as to our legalized bribery system. So then, where I see the pressure coming from, aside from outside the United States, would be among business elites, would be among the wealthy, would be among the industrialists who are losing money. So are we able to talk to them in a way that demonstrates that, yes, there are some people making money hand over fist. To Lockheed Martin and to ExxonMobil, this is a windfall. But to the rest of the country, it is not. And I think there's probably many people here who know this better than I do, but the idea of the business community turning against the Vietnam War, the fact how in debt the United States was going. I mean, we come off of the gold standard in 1974, right? Because of the debt caused by American wars. We can't pay our bills because we have to go to fiat currency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now we start talking that way. Who comes with us? Our libertarian friends. Right. And so we right. I mean, but I think it's the idea of getting this point across to people of how few people are benefiting from this, and particularly those who would have influence in a way that populism or grassroots electoralism will not. So again, the wealthy, the business elites, et cetera, so forth.
Ray?
Yeah, I appreciate what both Khury and Matt have said. I'm reminded of Cesar Chavez. He had problems with his followers because they were always kind of reluctant to bite the bullet. As a matter of fact, when he said, "Hey, I got an idea, let's have a grape boycott." Well, the answer was, "Well, I don't know if that would. I don't know if there's not enough of us." And what he said was, "Look, there are enough of us, but nothing's going to happen if we don't act." Okay. Now, younger people may not remember the effectiveness of the boycott, but I was almost murdered by my wife one time when I made a mistake and put some grapes in A&P, for God's sake. It was really good. So my point is this: look, we have a terrific advantage of being divided into chapters. Okay. And these chapters are led by really intelligent people. I know, I've been in several of these chapters. So how about the chapter nearest to Dover Air Force Base? What might they do? Huh? What about all the chapters next to Fort Bragg or whatever they call it these days? Or what, now, Veterans for Peace is doing a great job with banners and all kinds of placards and so. We could do more. we can kind of put our bodies into it. And I think that speaks to the normal citizen, especially if they see their own gas tank being filled for 70, $80 instead of 40. This is the time, folks. And I think, it's really just a matter of semantics, whether it's Israel or, or the U.S. I mean, they're bound at the hip, and there is absolutely no reason why Trump would have discarded the progress in Geneva on the 26th of February and and had his vice president listen to the mediator who was talking about great progress and great hope, and then the next day authorized this attack. Now, as I said, there's a group of four here. There's the president, there's Hexeth, there's Rubio, and I suppose there's the vice president. This is the Gang of Four. We have to point out that they're actually acting in response to being mousetrapped by Israel. How do I know that? Rubio said it, for God's sake. So let's get that word out without any hesitation or without any kind of fear that will be called names.
Steve Morse.
Okay, let me say something about Israel. I don't think the U.S. would have propped up Israel with all this money if they weren't willing to play the role of regional cop for U.S. imperialism. And another thing about Israel is I've noticed that we don't distinguish much between the Israeli government and Israeli people. We just say Israel. Now, I don't want to overestimate the opposition within Israel, but there is, and I think it's important that we recognize that. Combatants for Peace is a sister organization of Veterans for Peace. There are Israelis and Palestinian former combatants that are working together, which is kind of an amazing thing. And there are other groups like that standing together. There's Refusers Solidarity Network. So we'd never make that mistake with the U.S. We never conflate the U.S. government with U.S. people. But why do we do it with Israel? So yeah, I think we need to. Israel is not orchestrating this. I mean, they've got a crazy fascist in power, just as we do. And that's very dangerous. And they are. And what the Israeli government has done and is doing is very treacherous. But let's understand, as Matt said, that it's U.S. imperialism. Okay, thanks.
Comments?
Well, I just say, can I be heard?
Yes.
I can. Okay. I just say, if you look at the polls in Israel now, you have 80% of the Israelis want to continue the genocide in Gaza, the forced starvation of the Gazans, and are very much in favor of this war, which everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But it's clear to me from the chronology of the way it happened, yeah, it was jointly planned, but we were mousetrapped because Rubio decided, well, look, the Israelis have gone off the mark. We got to join them. And that, in my view, is about the most marked illustration of how they have us right where they want us.
All right. Jim Wolgemuth, that's me.
I was going to say for
go
with Steve's
ahead,
comments about the Combatants for Peace and others, when Ray and I were on the Veterans for Peace delegation in the West Bank in 2017, I feel like the 3 weeks we were there, every time we did something in the West Bank with the Palestinians, there were Israeli Jews with us, or very often.
Right.
And then when I was in the West Bank in 2024, that ability for Israeli Jews to, say, participate in action in the West Bank was impossible. I'll just also say it was impossible for the Palestinians in the West Bank to have any action. So that's just all to say the dynamics there have shifted. The heavy-handedness, the rule of the fascists, if you will, in Israel is pretty complete. And yeah, I mean, it's something we have to take into account.
Okay. All right. I had a quick question. I'm old. I am so tired of the United States empire. So, question to all three: do you think that possibly, we have bitten off more than we can chew, and we take a hit, not a, just take a hit, and ratchet ourselves back to become part of the community of nations versus the bully of the nations?
Well, I would say that,
Go ahead, Red.
well, I'd say that's the hopeful outcome here. Uh, but we have to worry about what happens before that. And that is Netanyahu uh, is already in extremis, okay? The judiciary has ruled against giving him a pardon for crimes that are clearly right out there and which he has lied about demonstrably, okay? So there's an existential problem not only for the state of Israel, but the state of Netanyahu and his immediate family. He's going to go to jail if he loses the election in October, and he is in extremis. So, what do we do? Well, what we expect is a false flag attack blamed on Iran that Mossad crawls all over this country. Let's face it, Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, has all manner of ways to do things almost up to the scale of 9/11. And my conviction, not my thought, is that it's a better even chance that they'll do that. Where does that leave us? It leaves us, making sure that enough Americans are so informed that they expect this. And when it happens, they say, wait a second, is this what it really seems to be? Or is this the Israelis trying in the last resort to rescue this operation, which they cannot rescue anymore unless the U.S. comes in with both feet? That seems to be likely because the Israelis are losing, and that's the inevitable result in the short term. Hopefully, this will work out so that somebody will speak some sense to Trump. Now, I'm trying to figure out who that might be. Don't ask me, all right?
Maybe
But,
you, Ray. Maybe you.
well, I've been trying, so that's my two cents. Thanks.
Matt?
Yeah, I don't have any hope of what you suggested there, Jim, unfortunately. I wish I could say that was the case, but I don't. I hate to,
No.
but like, I go back again to the construct that we're an empire. I mean, you can see it. There's an understanding within this administration that the way the American empire operates in the world as the sole hegemon, as the sole superpower, that we are still in that period is over. I mean, you see that with the Trump administration's now security strategy, where there's an understanding that we are already in a multipolar world, and that's something that makes all of their predecessors different. You'd never imagine the Bush team or the Obama or Biden teams giving up that dead hand grip they have on the idea of the United States as the primary power in the world. But this administration will, because if you read the NSS, it's not that the Americans in power want to retreat. The United States is going to withdraw from the world, but rather the empire is going to be reconstituted or reformed in order to dominate the multipolar world, not to compete, but to dominate. And you see that in what they write, you see that in their speeches, but then you see what their actions are. And so, this carrying out this war like this, as well as just say the Maduro kidnapping or other things. I mean, you can make the case of Maduro kidnapping fits into the NSS, but say the Christmas Day bombing of Nigeria, like in other things, doesn't make any sense. And so I'm afraid that the phrase, that we have here in the U.S., the dying mule kicks hardest, that's going to be what that's going to apply to the American empire. And that's the way it's going to go out, and that no amount of common sense or rationality or reason will ever take away from the desire of Washington, D.C. to maintain its status, particularly its entitlement to extract from the world. And I think that's what you have here, that they're not going to give up that good thing, and they'll go down rather than having to give up that extraction, that wealth, that power, that empire, if you will. What's interesting, I should say, too, is that we do see Trump doing certain things, such as the Shields of America or the Board of Peace, where he's trying to create alliances that or blocks or groups that previous administrations would not have done. And I think that's interesting, his view on how to handle this. Not agreeing with it, of course, but it's interesting to watch it.
Good Lord. So before I forget, if you want a copy of this webinar, please put your email address in the chat. Okay. Ron Batag.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, I think, as everybody's been saying, we really have a moment here where we really have to develop our own wits, both in terms of where we come from historically and also in terms of a renaissance. Just with people pointing to the fact that America is the empire, we can't forget that. And we point to Israel, and we can't forget that. I think what we really have to understand a bit is the old Venetian Empire, which became the British Empire, which still runs things through the central banks, including the Federal Reserve in the United States. And so since the assassination, really, of a number of presidents, but start from Kennedy to the present, we've had a real attack on the American presidency. And I think if you look at the failures that have happened there, you look at the failures in Congress, you look at the failures in the judiciary system, but the biggest one we have to look squarely at is the failure in the fourth state of government, which is the citizens, and the dumbing down on all kinds of our own identity as a sovereign people, our notions of history. So we are actually in a situation here on the anniversary of our founding 250 years ago to actually play an even broader role. And I'm reminded of a piece that Schiller wrote. It's called The Ghost Seer. And he takes you through a whole scenario around a particular prince as he's being taken down. And it's the layers of the things that we have to see. So we begin to reflect on the fact that the Zionist lobby and Zionism itself and Israel itself, all these things were created by the British Empire, and you can take it back historically even further in the empire. But it's really an empire operation for colonialism. And so
do you have a question, Ron? Do you have a question? Okay.
Yeah, to look at the present situation with the global South, with the BRICS, if we, the United States people, change our susceptibility of being manipulated, that's all enemies, and we come back to running our own credit by nationalizing the Federal Reserve, we can earmark the credit, build the infrastructure, and put 1.6 billion productive people to work, including many of ourselves, about 60 billion, and build our way out of this. So we got to take down what's referred to as this Epstein class, this money class, which is what runs the British, it runs the Israelis, the Zionism, it runs most of the United States, but it's not an American policy.
And I know you're getting to the question.
Right. Will we actually take that up? I dropped a slug in the channel. It's got a link to a conference that just took place this last Friday. But actually take up this alliance with the British and build ourselves out here with a Hamiltonian system of credit. What do people think about that?
So who wants to go first?
Well, I just follow up on what I was saying with the last question. This goes into that. The Americans won't, but the rest of the world might. And so I think what this war is presenting the opportunity for is a radical transformation of the world order. I mean, we already are in a multipolar world, but we're in the beginning phases of that. This war could be the cataclysm, if you will, that prompts change, that creates change, that this through destruction, right, creation, et cetera. And, you have a regional war, you have a global recession or even a global depression, and that provides the pressure, that creates the openings, that forces nations to do things differently. It's not going to be the United States, but will other nations, the path that they are already on, when they'll accelerate those paths and build alternatives to the American empire, build counters to the American empire. I mean, certainly the opportunities that will come from Russia and to Russia, China, India, other nations in this space, but also then too to other organizations such as, say, the BRICS. Right? What comes out of this transformative possibilities of this war, I think, are something that Washington, D.C. has not considered whatsoever. So this could be the war that the history books write about, that say this is the war that ended the American empire and put us firmly into this new world order, that the age of American dominance, 1991 to 2026, or whatever the bookend is going to be.
Ray?
I'll go with what Matt said.
Okay. All right. Very good. And Sam Coleman has another question.
I might need to yield the floor to John Braxton if he hasn't spoken yet, because I raised my hand first, but I've already spoken. I've got something I want to talk about quickly, but I saw John's hand and I thought
Okay,
maybe
John, go for it.
Well, thank you for that. I want to suggest two things that we can do, one short term, one longer term, and see if the speakers have a comment about that. One is No King's Day is coming up soon, in a week and a half. There's going to be literally millions of people demonstrating around No Kings. And I think it's an opportunity for Veterans for Peace and peace movement people in general to show up and turn it into a No Kings, No War rally. I don't think we can count on the No Kings people to turn it into a no war rally, but I think it's an opportunity for us to make a statement. And the other is longer term. And some of us, I'm an associate member of Veterans for Peace, and some of us are working hard to build support for the people over the Pentagon Act, which would cut the Pentagon budget by 10%. And we think it's going to get reintroduced sometime in the next few weeks, we hope. And so if your VFP chapter has not yet endorsed the People Over the Pentagon Act, I hope you will. And if if you have contacts in labor, then encourage labor to endorse the People Over the Pentagon Act. And I'd love to hear our speakers comment on that.
Matt, Ray?
Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I would just say that things like No Kings, we just have to coalesce. We have to keep encouraging one another, whether we come out of different movements or whatever. No one wants this war. And so our outreach, it seems to me, needs to be not only in our chapters, but also in any activity that's aimed at stopping this crazy stuff. So that's not very insightful, but I'd like to make that point. I hope we never turn away an opportunity to join in with other movements just because they don't agree on everything that we say, or vice versa.
Matt?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think Veterans for Peace has talking points. So even printing out such a thing and providing them to people at No Kings to give them more information. But certainly our flags, our hats, our shirts, yeah, that should all be at No Kings, and it should be at everything. Yeah, I mean, so definitely, and so yeah, I appreciate that, John.
Okay. Sam, are you going to give space to? Yes, I think you are.
well, okay.
Are you or not?
Although maybe I can do this really quickly.
Yes.
In the form of a question, have any of you run into the suggestion, this kind of putrid reworking of memories of the Vietnam War, that if we had conscription, somehow that would raise popular resistance? And I wouldn't even think anybody takes that seriously these days, but unfortunately, there's a syndicated program on Pacifica Radio by a gentleman whose name I won't use, who says we need it. And I'll throw something in. If nobody thinks this is a problem, that's wonderful. But now and then when I tune into KPFK, I hear this guy saying that.
Draft.
Yeah, I've heard that of I've heard it throughout the years. I've heard it since the 1990s that we have a civil military divide and people don't have skin in the game and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm in the same camp you are in, Sam, on that. And I will say that there are people who believe a draft is a possibility. In the last year, the Congress passed a law that made draft registration automatic. So 18-year-olds don't have to fill out the little postcard and mail it back anymore. It's automatic. When you turn 18, I'm assuming the Social Security Administration just signs you up for the draft. So we may think little of it, but I think there are people who actually believe that it'd be a sound way to round out our military as well as build national unity.
Ray?
I agree.
All right. All right. It's almost 8
Real
o'clock.
fast, Jim. I'll make this really fast. I wrote
Okay.
about this in 2008 for antiwar.com. I just checked. It's still there. It's called Michael Moore's off-color draft joke. It's there. Everybody, please read it because it's more true today than it was in 2008.
Did you put the link in the chat?
Oh, I bet I can do that. Thank you, Jim.
Sure thing. All right. We're at 8 o'clock, so we got to wind this down. And so we've got 2 questioners to go, and I think that'll do it. So Joe?
Can you hear me now?
You bet.
Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Several people mentioned the Zionists and Epstein and arrest, and I think that's the heart of it. I think you have to focus on the Zionists' control over our presidency, our military, our country, and the money interest in the Zionists is the area that we should be concentrating on. We should go after Ellison and Oracle, who's bought Paramount, CBS, and now TikTok, and he's paying $7,000 and above for anybody to write an article defaming anybody who's anti-Zionist. Now, there's a lot of support on this on the right suddenly. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Thomas Massey.
And you do have a question, right, Joe?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Okay.
Let me build on it a little bit. And when you go to your this event on a weekend that's coming up, make sure you're shouting out the names of these people and talk about the horrible things that they do. Epstein, we now know, answered to Ariane
Sharon?
the most successful Rothschild, runs one of the biggest banks in London. So it goes on and on and on, and these people's names have to come out, and that's who we should be talking about. Thank you.
Okay. And Arla and John.
Yes, thank you. I'm John Wilkes, president of the Albuquerque chapter of Veterans for Peace. I would suggest that we have a no kings, no war, no nukes. The initial excuse for this conflict was to prevent the Iranians from having nuclear weapons. The irony is we are getting ready to spend $1.9 trillion to, quote, modernize the American nuclear arsenal. May is pretty much our last chance to stop it, because that's when the program environmental impact statement hearings will happen across the country. So I would like our panel to weigh in as to what they think about grabbing onto this issue, because nuclear weapons are not just an issue in Iran, and of course the Israelis with their arsenal, but the U.S. Do we want to spend $1.9 trillion in the next 30 years to upgrade our arsenal. Could the panelists comment?
Oh,
Really,
go ahead, Ray.
Now, I would just say, John, thanks for being so well plugged into this timeline. Obviously, we should move and move quickly to make our views known and orchestrate whatever kind of protests we can, not only outside but inside congressional and senatorial offices. Matt, you probably have more sensible comments.
No, I mean, not anything that's positive. I mean, John, I'm really glad you said all this. I mean, the nuclear war aspects of this, I think, are there. I'm very afraid the Israelis will use a nuclear weapon. I don't see why they wouldn't. That's why they have them, to dominate the region. Israelis didn't build nuclear weapons because they are afraid of the Soviet Union. They build them to dominate the region. And when else, if they're ever going to use them, they would use them in a circumstance like we could possibly see, where they have lost the battle of the missiles and the drones, that the Americans can no longer really help them, and they have to find a way to end this war. And if after everything we've seen with Israel over the decades, but especially the last several years with the genocide, anyone thinks they wouldn't use a nuclear weapon, I don't know what to say. Where I get very nervous to go farther than that is that I think that explanation of how Israel would use a nuclear weapon would be how the United States would use a nuclear weapon against China in a war. And even though we're watching this war here where the United States Navy can't put the Abraham Lincoln within 700 miles of the Iranian coastline, there are still very many people throughout Washington, D.C., both Democrats and Republicans, who believe that fighting a war with China is not just necessary, but inevitable. And what we know from people who've taken part in these war games, like Larry Wilkerson, will tell you, almost always those wars they're always lost by the United States, but very often those wars go nuclear. And it's the United States that uses the nuclear weapons first. And so you could see almost a position where the United States would be in, similar to the Israelis, where they would use a nuclear weapon. So the urgency of this is clear. But along just the folly of going along with having these nuclear weapons hang over us like the sword of Damocles, right? I mean, and then just the stupidity of spending trillions of dollars on these weapons of mass murder, when the opportunity costs and what we could be doing otherwise are so clear. So yeah, I really appreciate you bringing this up.
Very good, John. All right, Patrick, I'm going to turn it back over to you to finish it up. And just one quick reminder, if you haven't put your email in the chat and you want a copy of this, because this was dynamic, then please do. So Patrick, do you want to finish it up and say goodnight to everybody?
Yeah, I'll just say what BB King says. What I want to know is, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, but he had a chorus too. So, any last words from Matt and from Ray?
I'd just like to underscore what Matt said about the likelihood that Israel would use one of those or a couple of those nuclear weapons. I think this logic is unassailable.
Right.
I think it's very likely that they would use that in extremis. And if Iran keeps pummeling Israel, before too many more weeks go by, they will be in extremis, and Netanyahu will have two reasons to use his nuclear weapons. One, to preserve as best he can the existence of Israel, and two, to preserve his existence out of jail. And those two are very potent factors when it comes to Netanyahu and the group that he leads now in Israel.
Yeah, I'll just say it's what would the consequences be to Israel for using a nuclear weapon? There would be none, right? I mean, our House of Representatives would probably pass a resolution celebrating their use of nuclear weapons. So, I mean, I go back to what Patrick said there. What are we going to do about it? I think we have to understand the reality of our political system here, how it's so insulated by money. And then, so how do we fight that asymmetrically? It is, but Yeah, I appreciate everyone being here tonight, and thank you, Jim, and for Patrick for putting this forward, because I think it comes back to Veterans for Peace's mission to educate the public about the true cost of war, and I think that's what we have to do. Is we have to do. But thank you, guys.
I see Sharon has her hand up.
Hi, I'm going to be reaching out to all of you when we need environmental impact statements after the Department of Energy releases their plan to build up to 60 pits per year. So we will need statements. Thank you to Arla and John and Ray McGovern for backing us up. Thank you.
And I guess you got the last word.